The portable embassy of heaven. The servant, the camels, and the covenant carried into the desert. There is a moment in the life of every human soul when it stands at the threshold of something immeasurably greater than itself. A moment when the ordinary, the loading of animals, the preparations for a journey, the accumulated goods of a household, suddenly becomes the visible architecture of an invisible eternal purpose. Genesis chapter 24, verses 10 through 14, is such a moment. And it is not a small moment. This chapter is the longest single narrative in the entire book of Genesis, 67 verses of the most carefully paced, most deliberately structured, most theologically saturated prose in the Torah. The ancient rabbis of the Talmudic period, aware of this unusual length, debated why the Torah would devote more space to the conversation of the servants of the patriarchs than to entire books of legal instruction. Their answer is astonishing. The conversation of the servants of the patriarchs is more beloved before God than the Torah of their descendants. God, they concluded, cares more about how a faithful soul speaks to him from the dust of the desert than about the formal recitation of commandments without inner devotion. Let us enter this teaching slowly, reverently, and with the full expectation that the same God who guided Abraham's servant at the well of Haram is still guiding every soul that approaches his word with the same quality of open, humble, genuine attention. The verb that starts everything. Verse 10 opens with 4 Hebrew words that launch the entire narrative. Laqach evdei Sarah gemalim. And the servant took 10 camels. The verb is laqach, the kal imperfect with a vav consecutive, the standard Hebrew narrative tense, from the root laqach, to take, to receive, to fetch. But laqach is never a casual or neutral verb in the Hebrew Bible. It is covenantally charged. God takes the man and places him in the garden in Genesis 2 verse 15, laqach. Abraham takes the wood and places it on Isaac for the ascent to Moriah in Genesis 22 verse 6, laqach. God promises in Ezekiel 36 verse 26 to take away the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh, venatati. In every case, laqach marks a purposeful, relational, covenant-embedded taking, an act in which the one who takes assumes responsibility for what is taken and orients it toward a higher and specific end. The Hebrew grammarian Wilhelm Gesenius, whose foundational grammar remains in active scholarly use 2 centuries after its first publication, notes that laqach frequently carries what he calls a factative nuance, meaning the act of taking creates a new relational reality. The servant does not just pick up animals for transport. He takes them into the orbit of the covenant mission. They cease to be Abraham's camels in a general sense and become the covenant's camels, directed toward the covenant's specific next generation purpose. The Masoretic cantillation mark over laqach in this verse is a monach, the sustained, leaning, meditative accent that holds the word in a long, descending breath before the narrative presses on. The ancient cantors were not simply providing musical notation. They were embedding a contemplative instruction. Pause here. Rest in this word. Feel the weight of what is being taken up, not just animals and cargo, but the hope of a patriarch, the future of a promise, the trajectory of a covenant that will run from Abraham to Christ. 10 camels. The portable embassy and the covenant's 2 tons. The number 10. Asa. In the Hebrew numerical and symbolic imagination, 10 is the number of completeness, of the full cycle of divine order. We see it in the 10 commandments, the 10 trials of Abraham enumerated by the rabbis, the 10 generations from Adam to Noah and from Noah to Abraham. The servant takes not 1 camel, not 2, but 10, and the text makes a point of the number. This is not a modest errand. It is a full, substantial, abundantly equipped diplomatic mission. The Zohar, the 13th century Kabbalistic masterwork, suggests that the 10 camels correspond to the 10 Sefirot, the 10 divine emanations through which God's character is expressed in the created world. To carry the goods of the master upon 10 camels is to carry the very attributes of God, mercy, justice, beauty, wisdom, sovereignty, into the wilderness of human history, searching for the soul that has been formed to receive them. Each camel in the ancient Near East carried between 200 and 400 pounds of cargo. 10 camels represented a literal 2 tons of provision, a portable embassy of Abraham's kingdom. In the ancient Near Eastern legal culture, such a delegation was not merely practical, it was the formal legal expression of the principal's honor and seriousness. The Nuzi tablets, clay records from the ancient Hurrian city discovered in northern Mesopotamia and dating to approximately the 15th century before Christ, contain detailed inventories of exactly these kinds of diplomatic marriage delegations, describing the composition of the goods, the authorization of the agent, and the legal status of the transaction. The servant was not improvising. He was participating in a well-understood protocol of covenant-level matrimonial embassy, carrying the full legal and material expression of Abraham's covenant wealth toward the woman who would carry that covenant forward. The camel itself, Jamal, carries within its Hebrew root a secondary meaning that enriches the symbolism. Jamal means to ripen, to wean, to bring to maturity, to deal bountifully. The camel is not merely the animal of burden. It is the animal of mature recompense, the creature whose very name speaks of things coming to their full and appointed completion. 10 camels bearing the matured fruits of Abraham's covenant toward the appointed woman in the appointed city at the appointed hour, these are the animals of ripened promise moving at last toward its next generation unfolding. Modern biology adds a dimension that the ancient world knew only experientially but that we can now understand precisely. The camel's hump does not store water, as was long believed. It stores fat, up to 36 kilograms of concentrated energy reserves. When this fat is metabolized through the chemistry of cellular respiration, it produces both energy and metabolic water, approximately 1 gram of water for every gram of fat oxidized. A fully nourished camel can produce approximately 40 liters of metabolic water from its own reserves during extended deprivation. The camel carries its own interior water source, hidden, invisible, available precisely when external water is absent. This is the theology of the interior life of the spirit-filled soul. You do not need a spring at every stage of the journey. You carry an interior reserve, built up by prayer, by scripture, by the accumulated experience of divine faithfulness in the years behind you, that sustains you through the desert stretches between visible refreshments. The camels that carry the covenant gifts are also living images of the soul that has been filled with the Spirit and can sustain its mission through the long aridity between encounters. Kol Tov Adonav Bi Yado. The full goodness of the Master in his hand. The text adds a phrase that is easy to skim past but that carries the full weight of the mission. Ve Kol Tov Adonav Bi Yado, and all the goodness of his Master was in his hand. The noun Tov, goodness, beauty, excellence, moral completeness, here describes not merely the material contents of the cargo but the entire covenantal quality of Abraham's life. Abraham's Tov is not just his silver and gold. It is the manifested goodness of a man who has walked with God for decades, who has believed the impossible, who has obeyed through the furnace of testing, who has offered his son on the mountain and received him back. The goods on the camels are the overflow of this character. The material wealth is the fruit of the covenantal faithfulness. The prepositional phrase bi yado, in his hand, is anatomically simple but legally and theologically immense. In ancient Near Eastern legal culture, the hand is the organ of agency, of authority, of the execution of will. When a master placed his hand under the thigh of a servant in the solemn oath-taking of verse 2 of this same chapter, it was the most binding legal gesture available. When the master's goods are placed in the servant's hand, the servant becomes the authorized channel through which the master's Tov moves into the world. He is not the owner. He is not acting for himself. He is the hand of the master extended into the foreign territory of the mission. Everything he gives, every gift he presents, every word he speaks in Bethuel's household, carries the full legal and relational weight of Abraham himself. Origen of Alexandria, the great 3rd century exegete, perceives in this phrase a doctrine of spiritual participation. The servant participates in the virtues of his master not by origin but by proximity, obedience, and mission. He has been so thoroughly formed by service in Abraham's household that he carries Abraham's character as well as Abraham's goods. And this is the spiritual reality of the sanctified life, not the achievement of personal righteousness but the slow formation by participation in the character of the master, until the servant's hand and the master's goodness become, in the field of the mission, functionally indistinguishable. For every person who feels that they are going into the desert of their next season without adequate provision, without the right qualifications, without sufficient resources, without the necessary character, this phrase speaks directly. Biyado. In his hand. The full tow of the Father's house has been placed in your hand. Not some of it. Not a provisional loan pending good behavior. The full tow of the new covenant, everything accomplished at Calvary, everything poured out at Pentecost, every promise sealed in the blood of Christ, has been entrusted to your hand. You go as the servant went, not empty, not improvised, not barely resourced. You go with all the goodness of the Master in your hand. The journey itself. Integrated motion and the formation of the servant. The text says Vaya kam vielech el Aram Naharaim, and he arose and went to Aram Naharaim. 2 verbs. Come, to arise, to activate from within, the internal resurrection of resolved purpose, and halak, to go, to walk, to move in the manner of one's life. These 2 verbs together describe what the documents you have shared beautifully call integrated motion. The servant's outer movement perfectly reflects an already settled inner decision. There is no gap between the resolve and the action. He does not deliberate after the commissioning. He does not negotiate for more information. He does not ask for a detailed map or a contingency plan. He arises and goes. The Hebrew narrative chain of verse 10, laqach, vaya kam, vielech, vivo, he took, he arose, he went, he came, creates what the phenomenological reading identifies as an experiential compression of journey. Each verb is not merely a physical action but a shift in consciousness. Intention becomes activation, activation becomes movement, movement becomes arrival. This is psychological coherence in narrative form. Many individuals carry internal fragmentation, contradiction between desire and hesitation, between belief and fear, that prevents the smooth translation of intention into action. The servant demonstrates what healthy, integrated motion looks like. The inner decision and the outer step occur as one continuous movement, without the paralysis of self-doubt or the entropy of indefinite deliberation. The Aram Naharaim that the servant travels toward is both a specific geographical location and a topology of consciousness. The land between the 2 rivers is the liminal cognitive space where multiple currents of thought, history, and possibility flow simultaneously. In such a space, certainty cannot be imposed. It must be discerned through resonance, through sustained attention, through the willingness to remain in the ambiguity long enough for the pattern to emerge. The servant does not escape the uncertainty of his mission. He inhabits it without collapse. This is the mature executive function that the psychological framework describes, the capacity to move without internal fragmentation, to act without false certainty, to trust without manufactured reassurance. The journey from Hebron in Canaan to Haram in Aram Naharaim was approximately 500 miles, roughly 800 kilometers, across the Fertile Crescent Corridor or the Syrian steppe. At the Camel's sustainable traveling pace of approximately 40 kilometers per day, this was a journey of approximately 20 to 22 days. 20 days of desert travel. 20 days of loading the camels each morning and unloading them each evening. 20 days of heat and dust and the slow, monotonous rhythm of animal footfall. 20 days in which the text says nothing. The silence of the journey in the narrative is itself a theological statement. God does not narrate every mile of the faithful servant's journey because the miles are not the point. The arrival is the point. And the 20 silent days of desert crossing are the invisible infrastructure of the visible miracle that is about to happen at the well. If this teaching has entered a place in you that other things have not reached, if the word has named something in you that has been waiting to be named, healed something that has been waiting to be healed, ignited something that has been waiting to be ignited, then let it continue its work. Do not hold it at the level of the mind alone. Let it descend. Let it become the thing your body knows, your spirit trusts, your daily life expresses. Let it change how you pray, how you serve, how you receive, how you wait. Let the servant's posture become your posture. Let Rebecca's generosity become your generosity. Let the well of the living God become the well you return to every evening, without fail, knowing that the appointed encounter is always possible in the place of faithful, consistent return. Subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Share it without hesitation with every person in your life who is thirsty, who is walking through their desert, carrying their camels, wondering if the well is real. Tell them it is real. Tell them the servant is already there. Tell them the evening is golden. Tell them the prayer has already been prayed and the answer is already on its way down the path from the city gate. Write to us at christ4life143@gmail.com. We are here for prayer, for the ongoing conversation, for the community of souls who take the living word seriously because the living word has taken them seriously. Stay tuned for the next video. Join us next time as we continue verse by verse through this inexhaustible covenant story, the story that is still happening, still unfolding, still finding its appointed ones at the wells of their ordinary and extraordinary lives.